Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune into today's session. I'm really thrilled to be here with you today. My name is Eleni Albanis, and I'm the chairperson of IRMSA's Young Professionals Committee. Today, I'll be spending some time with Duncan Wernberg, and we couldn't have decided on starting this series with anybody more apt than Duncan. He is one of our oldest alumni who partook in the 2012 surf internship through IRMSA. And as part of our overall strategy and intention of the Young Professionals Committee, in terms of guiding and supporting all the up-and-coming young risk professionals, we hope that our time with Duncan today will serve you well, that you can walk away with some nuggets that you can apply in your own life and your next steps. So yeah, let's get going. Duncan, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So today we'll be chatting about a really interesting and, in my opinion, a big topic, especially something that's pertinent to any up-and-coming young professional. Our topic for today is lessons learned from a young professional, thoughts on becoming a valuable employee, driving your career growth, and taking risks. So I'm really excited to unpack that with you today. I thought maybe we could start, maybe you could tell everybody listening in something about yourself, what you're doing at the moment. I know that you started out as a surf intern and now you're in a very exciting role at IsoMetrix. And from what I understand, very passionate about it. So maybe you can give us a little bit of insight there.
Sure, so I'm getting some free advertising for my company. Yeah, wasn't the intention. So I got involved with IRMSA back in 2012. As mentioned, I was one of the first interns chosen by them, which was very fortunate. And in fact, I was one of the first two students to go overseas with their internship. So we visited the States back in 12 for a couple of weeks, which was great. Career has progressed since then. I finished my studies, and actually, as a result of being involved in IRMSA, there was some interest from potential employers. So I was fortunate enough to get into my desired field and industry with a leg up from IRMSA. And today I am managing a team of business analysts in a GRC software company. So yeah.
Very exciting, very exciting. So just to track back a little bit, you did say that you were part of the surf internship. How did you hear about IRMSA? How did you get involved there? And what has been involvement since then?
Okay, well, actually in my final year of studies, the class, I was in the risk management class, and we were introduced to this opportunity to apply for an internship through IRMSA. And now at that point, I hadn't heard about IRMSA. I didn't know a hell of a lot about risk management either. It was one of the first weeks of our class. And I decided to take a risk and, apply for this quite a daunting application process. In fact, we had to go and sort of present to some of the top managers at IRMSA and present our understanding of risk management, etc. As mentioned, fortunately, I was one of the candidates who was successful. Since then, I've been involved with IRMSA, presented at the AGM a couple of years back, and now I serve as the vice chairperson on their Young Professional Committee.
Wonderful. And just out of interest, what topic did you present a few years ago at the AGM?
In 2015, I completed my master's. I did a research paper on risk management, and I presented my findings at the AGM. Yeah.
Wonderful, really wonderful. So already there, I think within the first few years, I think you finished your studies, already took part in an IRMSA internship, and like you said, it catapulted you, and it sounds like there was no stopping you from there. So I'd like to find out what has it been since you've started working? What has it been like? And what steps have you taken to kind of embed yourself in the organizations that you've been in and sell yourself as a true value adder in the risk management space?
Sure. I think it's been an interesting journey. I, for one, I quite enjoy adulting. I know a lot of people complain about it, but I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed being a part of the world of work. I think entering the world of work in today's reality, oftentimes people finish their studies and they enter into an industry or a company, or in fact a role that isn't 100% aligned to what they wanted to do. Now, I didn't necessarily have the problem, but I think it's important to grasp that opportunity and not be caged by your first job title. I think as soon as you start, showing the value and almost transcending that role in terms of your delivery and the quality of your work, you can quite easily move around in any company that you've joined. So I think first and foremost, don't be caged or limited by your first role. I think importantly as well is to ask for feedback. Some environments will give you continuous feedback, but that's really the only way to consistently gauge your own performance and how you're faring, and to find, I suppose, any gaps or weak spots that you were unaware of. If you join an environment that isn't forthcoming with feedback, by all means, I think ask for it. Put your hand up. No one's going to turn you away if you're asking people for feedback. And lastly, ask for goals. If anything's unclear, ensure that you know what you're meant to be achieving and the value you're supposed to be bringing to that organization, and don't stop at their achievement. So, again, transcend your role. If you have specific goals and you find that you've accomplished them and you have some spare capacity, go over and above. Don't be scared to dip your fingers in other areas of the business and other roles of the business, etc. I don't think anyone's going to be unhappy with you if you go over and above what was expected.
Absolutely. I love that. I think the biggest thing that echoed for me was transcend your role and don't be caged by your initial role. So just maybe 2 points on that. I know that when I first started, I actually didn't start in the risk management industry, and I actually felt a little bit like overwhelmed by that first role. And if I just reflect on the points that you pointed out now in your feedback, I think those was in some way somehow applied, and that definitely does help one. Go over and above, ask for the feedback. And I think asking for the feedback is step one, but step two is being willing to hear the feedback, because you're not always going to get good feedback. So just be ready to hear the good and the bad, and stay consistent with the good and be willing to improve on the not so good. So yeah, I really like that. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a good point around being vulnerable and opening yourself up to that negative feedback and taking it, hopefully it's constructive, but taking it and internalizing it instead of becoming defensive. Yeah.
How long were you in your first risk role for, may I ask?
About 2 years. So started off as a risk consultant, I suppose, kind of the skivvy of the organization. But from there I started moving around. I suppose I was in the role for 1.5 to 2 years before the first move took place.
Yeah, so you refer to it as kind of a skivvy, and I think we all start in a role where you do everything for almost nothing, like you go over and above. But I think that is what sets one apart. If you consistently remain within that mindset of just, giving and being, I think the more you give, the more you learn as well. So I think that it might not seem like a fair give and take in the beginning, but when you sit back and you reflect now, I think the amount that you were willing to give then, you learned probably 10 times more than other colleagues that weren't working as hard or that weren't willing to go above and beyond. And I think that also helps build some trust, which also helps one, get involved in a little bit more. You start asking questions. So, yeah. And I think when it comes to growing within one's career, I think step one would be, focusing on oneself. So what would you say were some of the steps that you've taken to focus on and ensure that you've had some personal growth throughout your career? Has that been a priority for you?
Yeah, of course. I think personal growth is and should be important to everyone. You're almost guaranteed to grow in your career if you're growing personally, providing you have the correct attitude in your career, I suppose. And I think, personal growth starts with the growth mindset. So academics have told us that, there's this fixed mindset versus a growth mindset individual. And the fixed mindset kind of accepts things how they are and doesn't see that there's much room and potential for growth. It believes that there is a capacity that is reached in each person. whereas the growth mindset refuses that. And, it kind of couples with that lifelong learner term, where, you're continuously learning through your life, not only in your career, but personally as well. So I think personal growth is essential. There's a whole host of tools and self-help books and all sorts of material in terms of how to grow personally. For me, I find it very useful to set goals each year through the use of a vision board. Continuing the academic studies has always been forefront for me as well. And then, reading quite extensively and widely. So, when I studied, I found that you're kind of limited in what you're exposed to. And, as I sort of matured, I started finding interest in other topics, such as, psychology, the sciences, working out, eating right, relationships, spiritual side of things. And, there's a whole host of material out there. So, yeah, I definitely encourage people to grab a book. I've learned a lot more from books than I've learned from any of my academic courses, in fact, over the years. And I think, reading is definitely an underrated, probably more unpopular thing today than it was in the past, but a lot of potential to grow yourself through books. Yeah.
And I guess maybe for all the Gen Z people that are listening in, for those that don't want to read, they can always just listen to an audio book. I guess you'll yield the same outcome. But you think that's really important, at least to me. I think there's a balance in life, right? So it's not just the academic side. It's not just, the traditional personal growth where you think it's just about setting goals. It's about the spiritual side and the relationships and the eating right and the training. And I think one only reaches balance when you really give enough attention to all of those areas. I think otherwise at one point in time you'll feel off kilter. What would you say has been one of your most impactful books that you've read over the past 10 years?
Okay, putting me on the spot here. There's two that come to mind. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And he speaks to all of the biases that creep into our minds and how we are so quick to jump to conclusions without looking at the facts. Very difficult read, but yeah, the lessons in it are worth the pain in working through that book. And then the second book is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And he essentially does research into all sorts of different successful people over the ages and, identifies trends and patterns that make them successful. So really interesting and quite a fun read, that one.
Absolutely. And what I like about the two books that you read is both of them, in my opinion, are quite strongly linked to risk management, actually. I think as a risk professional, you can read this and look at it from the risk perspective and take a lot out of there professionally, as much as personally, as much as you can personally. So that's really nice. And just one last point on the academic side of things. So I know that you mentioned you've learned a lot more outside of the academic realm, but I do believe that there is a time and a place for academics, which you implied. So I think it shows us the structure of the ideal world, but the real task is, once you've got that theoretical view, how do you implement it in the real world? Because it's never going to be step 1, 2, 3. You're going to jump all over the place before you can even get to step 1, and then you're going to go to step 5. So that leads me into having stepped out of this theoretical bubble and also spent some time on yourself through personal growth endeavors. How have you focused on your professional growth and adapting into structure, into a lot less structure, because the real world isn't as structured as we're sold at university?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think anyone who's left university and gone into the world of work knows exactly what you're talking about. University or whatever you studied gave you this rule set, and you get into the job and it's almost as if no one's applying this rule set, and you're quite concerned. You say, guys, this isn't what the theory tells me. So it's definitely a steep learning curve at the beginning. I think you just have to get your hands stuck in and be open to the ideas and the ways that it's happening in the practical sense. And by all means, bring in the theory where you think it might help the organization in achieving its goals, but also have an open mind to straying a little bit away from the theory in practice, based on, what's happening in the organization and how they've been doing things to achieve their goals.
Absolutely, absolutely. So being flexible, being open-minded, and being willing to step away from the norm, I guess. And I guess that's also where if we take us back to the first set of feedback that you gave us about asking questions, setting goals. If you know what you're working towards and you're willing to work with people that know a little bit better and ask them for feedback in terms of how you're doing, I think that will always help you adapt to the way of working. Yeah. And in terms of skill sets in the workplace, have you done any additional courses throughout your years in your professional career, or what do you do to ensure that you're kept up to date?
I've continued my academic studies whilst working full time, and the different jobs that I've filled have given me the opportunity to do a number of different courses as well. So coaching, presentation skills, employee performance management. In fact, I just finished a management development program in my current company. So it almost always seems as if there's something on the go, there's some learning taking place, be it a non-formal certificate or an internal course at the company or an academic qualification. So I've kept myself quite busy and just being mindful of that lifelong learner philosophy. And staying hungry and keep learning.
Absolutely, always have the appetite, right, to keep going. Yeah. So you said now that you just finished a management course, and I think one thing a previous manager told me that always rings true in my head is that before you can be a manager of others, you have to be able to be a manager of self. And again, I think this all kind of like all these puzzle pieces are fitting together of if you don't focus on yourself and, do the personal growth and make sure that you ensure that you spend some time on your professional growth as well and learning new skills, I don't think you can be an effective leader. So from just out of interest, if anything comes to mind, what would you say was your key takeaway from your management or leadership course? Because I think that's one someone can apply to other people, but to themselves as well.
Sure. A lot of the course was around, the course is called Wired to Influence, and it speaks about being the MD of your desk, again, transcending your role, influencing those around you, etc. One thing that stuck with me from this course was the or, verse, and philosophy. And the philosophy goes as when you are trying to accomplish something in the workplace or in your personal life, people often jump to sacrifices where they say, I can do task A or task B. And the philosophy behind this course was there has to always be a way to do A and B. So I can be a manager in my career and I can stay fit and I can fit well, eat well, and I can have good relationships with my friends and colleagues. And that's kind of the philosophy behind it. And I just thought is quite a positive philosophy in a world that's quite quick to come up with or statements.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think, however, that there's a time and place for the ands and the ors? Like I think you mentioned in the beginning of your career, you were well, you didn't really say this, but maybe that's what I took out. Maybe I'm projecting here, but worked a lot, and I'm assuming that the amount of time that you had available either to train or to see friends was probably a lot less than what you have now. So when you start out, the sacrifice might be higher because you're trying to establish a reputation for yourself, you're trying to demonstrate your skill sets, and I think one has to be okay with that, with a little bit of sacrifice at one point in time, but to understand that the sacrifice shouldn't be forever. So it's maybe about finding that balance as well. I don't know what your views are on that.
I think, we're speaking about trade-offs. In fact, I just did an MBA 2 years ago, and I think that was probably the most intense.
Almost thing to do. Congratulations.
No, thank you. I just mean, that was probably the most intense time from a career perspective because, the full day of job and the studies and not too much time for everything else. But, I spoke earlier about setting goals and having a vision board. And I think if that is the priority in terms of what you're trying to achieve for a period of time, by all means, you can put the effort in to achieve that. And I think, again, it's just important in terms of what it is you're trying to achieve, because, yeah, it's not always an and, I suppose, although I like the philosophy. There are times where you may need to sacrifice one area to get ahead in another.
I think you summed it up really nicely. I think it comes down to what is your priority. And if you don't have goals and you don't know what your priorities are, I think everything can be an and or everything can be an or, because you're all over the place. So I think that's a nice way to bring it back home, is just make sure you've got your goals, make sure you know what your priorities are, and you adjust and behave accordingly.
Yeah.
So Duncan, next question.
Yeah.
Not all spoken. What roadmap would you say? I know we've covered a lot. Again, I think this is now the non-theoretical. We've jumped from A to B to C to Z. But if we can maybe just sum it up in a little bit of a summary, what would you say your roadmap has been to arrive to where you are now and kind of continue on the trajectory that you are, career-wise?
Yeah, okay. Look, I think first and foremost, every person's roadmap is going to be unique to them. So yeah, hopefully there's some value in what I'm going to say. But yeah, I started off in the software business as a consultant. I've remained in software for the duration of my career to date, predominantly in GRC, so governance, risk and compliance software. And, you know, I've just gone from one role to the next. I was involved in sales at some point, where I did a sales role for a couple of years. And then I moved back into, I suppose, my bread and butter, which is more the consultant business analyst space. So yeah, that's pretty much the roadmap over the course of my career.
Wonderful. What I'm hearing there is that you have had different roles, but I think all of them have somehow prepared you and molded you to do what you're doing now as optimally as you are. From where you started to doing sales, I think sales and consulting also goes hand in hand. You need to know how to work with people, how to, you know, understand your product, market it, address people's needs. So I think that's another little subtle nugget that you gave there, is no matter what you do, learn while you're doing it, and it'll come in use, no matter where you end up. So you refer to GRC as your bread and butter, so I sense a little or a lot of passion there. Do you see yourself staying in the GRC space, or have you got something else that interests you, or where do you see yourself in the next few years? Excuse me.
Yeah, I think like the GRC industry is, you know, quite a new industry. It is growing in popularity and application across, you know, different businesses. I feel a little bit lucky to have gone into a software space in the GRC domain, because it almost feels as if, you know, you were joining that startup that was about to blow. So it's as if you got on the ground floor of Facebook. So, you know, for me, I find the domain extremely interesting. I find that it is, you know, growing globally, the application, the different roles, etc. And yeah, definitely an exciting place to be. And I would like to see where the industry goes, and, you know, to be a part of that growth.
Absolutely. And I'm sure with the fourth industrial revolution, another buzzword, but also with how technology is just progressing as much as it is, that there's a lot of exciting stuff that will be happening within your space. I know that GRC has a little bit of a set parameter, but I mean, what can happen within that space? I think there's a lot that's yet to come and yet to be established and discovered. So I do understand that it must be exciting to be in that space. I think what else I've really enjoyed is just hearing you talk about how you enjoyed the GRC space, the software space, and just being able to reflect back and knowing how many other different risk fields there are, but that a risk manager isn't just one kind of person that fits into one kind of role. There are so many different roles out there. And you've just found something that links up to your values, your passions, and how you can fulfill your risk passions in that certain field of risk management. So I think that's amazing that you find yourself within that space, and that you're happy there. Yeah. Have you got any, I don't know, final thoughts in terms of being in the GRC space or preparing yourself for the world of work, or something that you're planning on doing that you want to share with those of us listening in?
No, I think the final tidbit I'll leave those as, as young professionals are entering the world of work is, just stay hungry, and complacency, I think, is the root of all evil when it comes to career development. And I've seen a lot of people in their roles who are quite complacent and do the bare minimum. And, that's a sure way to plateau. So stay hungry, stay positive, use your ands where possible instead of your oars. And yeah, just rock your careers from here on out.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much. So just to take it back to what you first said is don't be caged, don't be limited, and transcend. Stay hungry. I really enjoyed talking to you today, Duncan. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I'm sure we will talk again because there's so much more that's happening within your world. And I think there's so many more topics to unpack. So yes, thank you so much for your time.
Cool. Thank you. Been great talking.
Thanks. And for everybody that has listened in to this little session, I think what Duncan has shared with us today is really valuable. And I hope that you can apply some of his nuggets into your current roadmap, and just reflect where you are and see if there is anything to apply here. But definitely, like he said, don't be caged, don't be limited, set goals and transcend. Thank you.